So our schedule today is that we're going to hear introductions from our four cases, these fine people up on the stage. Then we're going to go into round one for 45 minutes. You're going to go, and some of you will stay in this room. You can choose where you go. We'll help direct you where to go once we hear the cases. We're going to do a coffee break for 30 minutes. We're going to do a round two for 45 minutes. And then we'll do conclusions as a plenary. If you have to leave in the middle, that's okay. We'll have some other people join in the middle. That's also okay. But the point I want to make is you're going to hear intros from four people, and you'll have time and the chance to hear presentations and spend sessions with two out of the four. Now, the reason we've given a 30-minute coffee break in the middle is because you might think, I want to talk to all of them, Annika, and I want to give you that chance. So you can talk to the other two over coffee. So those of you, as I mentioned, here in the room will physically go into rooms around the GCSP, who, by the way, are wonderful in hosting us. This is not the easiest session, and we really appreciate all their support. And those of you online, you'll have the chance to go into a breakout room on Zoom. The Spanish session will stay in the main room because we learned that you actually can't have interpretation in breakout rooms. For those of you who organize online, it's a bit frustrating, but the Spanish speaking session will stay in here. It'll be in English in this room, but Spanish online. What other, maybe actually, are there any other, I want to get into the topics. Are there any other sort of like, I don't understand what the heck I'm doing here questions? We're going to tell you where to go in a minute, but are there any other logistical questions before we get into the good stuff? Okay. Well, I'll be around. You know who I am. And there are a bunch of us around wearing these purple lanyards, and we can help. So let's hear a quick presentation. Do you want to just give us a little bit of a rundown of your topic in maybe 2 minutes or something?
So thank you, Annika. Hi, everybody. My name's Peter, and I work for the Principles for Peace Foundation here in Geneva. It's great to be part of this event today. Our session today is looking at the nexus between climate change and human security, with a focus on the Amazon basin in Latin America. And to incentivize your attendance, we're going to offer free papaya juice at our session. Only joking. So I think we're all aware that the world is on fire at the moment. I mean, between conflict, the largest number of conflicts at the moment since the Second World War, the climate emergency, extreme weather events, we know what's happening, and it's obviously very serious and a severe threat to our very existence as humanity. So what our session today is going to look at is two case studies from the Amazon basin, Brazil and Colombia, and looking at essentially this intersection between security and climate change and environmental degradation or environmental protection, and particularly the role of security actors, and how they can potentially support, addressing climate change issues, environmental issues, but also obviously building more positive relations with local communities, and ultimately also contributing hopefully to peace building, because we know that obviously climate change and environmental degradation have the capacity to generate conflicts in many of these contexts, particularly also with indigenous communities as well. So that's our pitch for the session this afternoon, and look forward to seeing you later. Thanks very much.
And you, like many others, have online speakers that are coming from the context that you're speaking.
We do, from both countries, a range of speakers, some government officials, some local community representatives as well. And we have two great facilitators, Diego, who I think is somewhere with us. Where's Diego? There's Diego. And Christina, who's online, who's a dear friend, and will talk to us about Colombia today.
So that'll be in this room, both rounds. And for those who are online, it's in the main room. You don't go into a breakout room, just stay where you are. And there'll be Spanish interpretation for those of you online. But the language in this room, even if there's a speaker online speaking Spanish, the language of this room will be set to English. So if you do not understand Spanish, you can still hear the material. Over to you.
Well, thank you. I find it a little odd that Geneva Peace Week would pitch us against one another, but
exactly.
We're not offering any juice. So for those of you online that you don't get, the goodies, maybe you can come and watch us. I'm Barbara Ramos. I'm the Chief of Research at the International Trade Center, just down the road. And I am here today with three wonderful colleagues based here in Geneva, Keith, Eric, and Valentina, and two even more wonderful colleagues in the field, Sarah and Moy. They're based in Baghdad, Iraq, and they'll be sharing a little bit of their experiences helping small businesses in fragile and post-conflict areas. And the reason why we have this constellation of ITC people here today is that you are the lucky ones to get a sneak peek of our flagship publication, the SME Competitiveness Outlook, which will be launched in Baghdad at the end of November. So today we're going to do a little bit of a dry run and share with you the main findings of our report. And in this report, we look at fragility and conflict from a slightly different perspective. We see the literature and a lot of case studies looking at fragility as a state phenomenon, right? The state is fragile, even though we don't say that anymore. But by and large, we look at it as a macro phenomenon. And in this report, what we do is look at fragility from the point of view of small businesses, those businesses that stay when the large businesses can actually leave. So we disaggregate the fragility concept into different dimensions, into different intensities, to really understand how operating in this context can constrain small businesses. But at the same time, looking at these businesses as agents of change, as those that stay and can actually lay the foundations for future stability. But I've been told that not a lot of people get excited with research and data. I don't understand those people. But to complement the findings of the report, we'll be sharing some of the experiences, and that will be with Keith, Eric, Sarah, and Moy, because they are implementing a lot of the findings from the report in our programs in Iraq. So I hope you can join us.
And they will start in the room that is directly next door to us. For these 3 sessions here, there's a sign on the door. And so this is about small businesses. So the sign is on the door. They'll start there. They will move into a room over there. We will help you get where you need to go. No stress. And for those of you online, it is the breakout room called Small Businesses. Over to you.
Thank you, Annika. So I'm Arthur from TrustWorks Global here in Geneva, and we'll be taking you to a different region, the Sahel, to share with you some of the lessons from what we call a pilot project we've been running over the past 2 years together with the European Institute for Peace based in Brussels, called Environmental Peacemaking in the Liptako Gourma, so basically the border areas between Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso. And the idea, I mean, as you've seen, for those who follow the region, there's been a prevalence of international militarized approaches, whether the regional Barkhane force, the G5 Sahel, MINUSMA, which is now about to close. And the idea was to try to shift the discussion towards the root causes of conflict and trying to make sense of, concept like environmental peacemaking and climate security by working with local actors. There are lots of initiatives, so we don't want to create new mediation initiatives, peace initiatives. The idea was to identify what was already happening and to try to accompany them through different ways to work with peace actors to help them put an environmental lens. Of course, they recognize a lot of the causes of the conflicts may be related to natural resources, land, water, protected areas, mines, etc. But often they're putting out fires, right? They don't necessarily have, for all kinds of reasons, the time, of course, the resources, sometimes the knowledge to try to shift. So we've been bringing knowledge to those. And we've been working also with actors who traditionally work more on environment to try to help bring a peace lens to it. In a more preventive approach. So what we're going to be sharing with you is basically the lessons from working with those actors. It's about a dozen actors from the region, and we work with, we've made a point at working at different levels. So we work with state actors, so in the governments basically of the 3 countries, as well as non-state actors all the way to the very local level with traditional authorities such as emirs, for instance.
And I'll say that the only reason that they don't have folks who are from Liptako Gourma tuning in to speak, because they work, I mean, it's a very collaborative project, is because I failed to tell them that they could. So don't hold that against them, hold it against them. And they'll be in the small room that is over there, and it says Liptako Gourma on the door. Over to you.
Great, thanks, Annika. Hi, everyone. I'm Beatrice Mosello. I'm a senior advisor at Adelphi. For those of you who don't know Adelphi, we are a Berlin-based think tank working on many different aspects around environment, development, climate change. Our program particularly focuses on the links between climate change, diplomacy, and security. In our room today, we also don't have any goodies to offer, unfortunately, but I can promise you a very unique experience because we will be talking about a report that has just been published 2 weeks ago. So you'll be kind of the first ones to hear about this report in a public format. We have been working on Haiti and looking at the linkages between climate change and violence and insecurity in Haiti. But what we've done with our work there and what we would like to present to you and think about with you today is really how can we use the climate change adaptation, environmental protection, environmental action as an entry point for building peace and social cohesion in communities, between communities, starting from the local level to kind of address the drivers of conflict and towards peace building. So we'll be talking about it using our study, as I mentioned before. It's a really interesting piece of work. I'm not just saying it because we worked on it, but I really found it fascinating because it was realized in collaboration with what has become the Haiti Climate Security Group that has been created with our partners at UN, the Environment Program and UN Development Program in Haiti that actually started and worked with us throughout the study. They're going to be online and joining us as speakers today. So it's a unique experience, participatory approach, a research methodology that really tried to look at the elements of inclusion and intersectionality to make sure that we could hear as many voices as possible in Haiti, including those of the people that normally are not that heard. And again, we'll talk a bit about the methodology that we used in our first session. So we'll have 2 sessions. They're going to be different from one another, just to keep things interesting. In the first one, we will talk about the participatory approach and the methodology we used, and we will be joined by 2 speakers from Haiti and our partner at UN Environment Program to present you the work that we've been doing. The second discussion round, we will outline some of the suggested ways in which climate change adaptation and nature-based solutions can be used as entry points for peace building and working on social cohesion at the community level, going up then to the government level. And also there we will be joined by 2 speakers from Haiti that are very much doing this work on the ground. Both sessions will be facilitated by myself and my colleague Spencer here in the room. We both worked on the report together with another colleague, Luca De Stricker, who is in Berlin, couldn't join us unfortunately today. And then after every presentation, we hope to leave some time for questions and answers so that you can also contribute, sharing your experience on how to use climate change to build peace.
And that session will be held, there are 2 sort of smaller rooms over there, and that session will be held in the other smaller room. For the second round, they will move into the bigger room. So if you're dying to hear about Haiti and the room is full the first round, then you can go in for the second round. They'll be in a slightly bigger room. For those of you who came in a little bit late, welcome to the Action Library. The idea of this event is to give you the chance to hear 2 different rounds from these lovely folks up on the stage. We'll be going into breakout rooms. I'm assuming we have some late participants joining online as well. We'll be going into breakout rooms, literal physical breakout rooms and technological breakout rooms. Again, we'll have small businesses as agents for change in this room over here on the other side of this wall. In this room, we'll hear about the Amazon basin in the first round, right? Yeah. And then we'll have Haiti and the Taco Gorma in the rooms over there. You can ask myself or other folks who are wearing these purple lanyards if you have questions about where to go. And again, you'll have 2 rounds with a 30-minute coffee in between. I remind you that we get 1 shot at this catering. And if we use all the coffee going into the first round, we have to live with our choices. So just putting that out there. For those of you who are online, we're about to open breakout rooms. you should have the option, in theory, to join the breakout room, the 3 of your choice. Again, the Amazon basin stays in the main room. If you don't see that option, don't panic. Please just type in the chat which breakout room you'd like to join, and myself and my colleagues will help you get placed in there. We're giving ourselves a good 5 minutes of transition time because we know there's a lot of choreography here. We invite you to come into this space with goodwill and patience as we do a lot of moving around, but moving our bodies jiggles the way that we think about the world, and we hope that it helps you have great conversations. So please go forth. Let's open the breakout rooms.
Shall we? 4 years.
Lovely talk.
Love to see the report.
I will send a.
Tina's trying to come on. I ritual myself 15 years ago.
No, really? Yeah,
I think it was your first year in Geneva.
I think that's what it is.
at the graduate.
Sorry, guys.
Good to see you. I haven't moved very
I
far.
was just telling, I worked for 4 years in Baghdad.
Oh, really?
Yeah, after I worked here, I went to Baghdad.
I was gonna say, I would also.
One day I would.
That's you actually, the second one on video.
Let's do that.
Good luck.
4 rounds so that we can.
You're sitting in the middle. And he's gonna come and join us.
Ethan might also wanna
You should, yeah, I think you should.
coax him up here perhaps.
Exactly. We've got lots of environmental security, competitive events. It's the new flavor, isn't it?
Nothing much.
Diego wants to.
Send me one.
Usually they are coffee.
Business in Iraq.
We're doing Colombia first, then Brazil, so you choose.
Doing Colombia.
I'm with Cindy.
There's definitely.
Destroying it.
Yeah, there's not gonna be. It's later the day to be drinking coffee.
Yeah, Diego, maybe just another couple minutes and then 1 minute or so, and then we'll get started. 1 or 2 minutes.
I feel confident because we're in the big room of techie people with us. Oh, no, exactly, totally. I have challenges enough navigating between Zoom and Teams and everything. You know,
We're heavily on the younger team.
exactly. The thing also was, when I was a student, I worked for the East Coast for 4 years, so you always have IT support. So now,
There's kind of like
what is this new form? I didn't realize how that stuff for granted.
1 more minute, and then I might clarify as we're getting started. Nazareth may still having trouble.
Oh, no, but we were expecting that.
Maria Paula may be able to jump in for her.
Okay.
Want to let everybody know we'll start in just a moment. We're trying to correct some last minute technical difficulties.
Let's continue.
Yeah.
My group, I love it. Usually when they're.
How are you?
I'm gonna turn.
Sessions we go.
I think you can basically.
Try to get the coordinates read or not.
There's an interpreting function.
But you can't do.
Yeah, I have a lot of respect for simultaneous training. Yeah.
It's so challenging.
Yeah. Do it, Jennifer, though. No, I think I missed that one.
Hey, it is my pleasure to welcome everyone in the room and all of you joining us online to this session on exploring the nexus between climate change and human security, Perspectives from the Amazon Basin. My name is Abby Robinson. I'll be moderating this session, which is going to focus on 2 cases in the Amazon Basin, Colombia and Brazil, to really explore these connections between climate change and human security from the perspective of different actors on the ground. And I want to emphasize, as Annika did earlier, when she introduced the session overall, that this is a human library, an action library. And so our main emphasis really is on offering a space for our colleagues in Colombia and Brazil to share their experiences, share their stories, and we're really looking forward to it. As part of this, we're also going to be unpacking, and I hope challenging, concepts of accountability and security, and what these really mean for longer-term peace and prosperity in the region. And we have some excellent speakers lined up. Just a couple of administrative notes. First, we're going to run our session a little bit differently. So the first 45 minutes will be dedicated to Colombia. And then, as Annika mentioned, we will have a 20-30-minute coffee break in the middle. And then when we come back, we'll turn our focus to speaking about Brazil. For each of these sessions, we'll have introductory remarks, give the floor to our speakers in the region, and then we'll wrap up with, I hope, plenty of time for questions and discussion with the audience, both here in the room and online. And also, if you are joining online and would like to use interpretation, we have Spanish and English available. Please just make sure you select the right channel on Zoom. And with that, I would like to introduce our speakers for this session. First is Cindy Chingon here in the room, who is a Senior Partnerships and Advocacy Officer with Principles for Peace. Next is Cristina Hoyos, joining us online, who is the head of the Latin America and Caribbean unit at the Geneva Center for Security Sector Governance, better known as DCAF. We also have Colonel Lurangeli Franco joining us online as well. She's an officer with the Colombian National Police, and specifically with the Unit for Peace Building, or UNIPEP, which is responsible for implementing the peace accords in Colombia. Nazaret Cabrera is also joining us online. Nazaret is a key social and environmental leader in her territory in the Colombian Amazon, and also a member of the Huitoto indigenous community. And we have Maria Paula Velasquez from the National Interethnic Network of Women Defenders of the Environment with Fundación Natura. And I just want to offer one other quick note before we get started. Nazaret has unfortunately had some connectivity issues, so it may be that Maria Paula will step in for her when we get to her portion of the discussion, but we will try to give her the floor first. And with that, I would like to turn to our first 2 speakers so they can set the stage for this discussion. And I'd like to ask Cristina first to share very briefly some key recommendations and findings from research that DCAF has recently conducted in Colombia on the intersection of climate change and human security. And then we'll turn it over to Cindy to talk about accountable security as a key principle for peace. So Cristina, over to you first, please.
Well, first of all, Abby, thank you very much for giving me the... I'm sorry, connectivity from Ecuador is very complicated, and I'm trying to handle this through the mobile phone. Sorry for that. But first of all, I thank the platform and our co-organizer of this event, Principles for Peace Foundation, for this great opportunity to present the key findings of the 2 studies that we have developed over the last 3 years to help to define the role of the security sector in the mitigation of climate change in the context of the Amazon Basin. We're very pleased that we had at the beginning 1,145 registration. Right now it's a little bit lower, but I think for this event in the Geneva Peace Week reflects very much the high level of interest in this relatively new area of work. The 2 studies, one in Colombia and Brazil, have been developed by the Latin American and unit in DCAF, and the reason why we developed them was to gain more evidence-based information about the role of the security sector in a region which is gaining more and more international interest. The threats of extreme temperatures, droughts, water scarcity, and flooding coupled with human-led environmental crimes undermine human security and social economic development. Vulnerable groups, including indigenous communities, are affected the most. In this context, for us, it's key the question on how can we promote accountable security to address climate crisis in the Amazon basin? And I would like to present the key findings of the study that we developed and published last year in Colombia about indigenous and rural women's voices, recommendations to address climate security risks. The objective of the study was to contribute to fill the existing gap by developing recommendations for designing local context-specific indicators to collect evidence on the impacts of the climate crisis on rural and indigenous women's security conditions. And I would like to talk very quick on the key findings of the study. And one of them was that the rural and indigenous women's perspective security is closely related to the protection of ancestral practices, access to healthy and sufficient food, elimination of sexual and gender-based violence, access to electricity and clean water, financial stability, protection of resources and the soil, as well as the protection of environmental activists and local organizations. And I would like to emphasize a little bit on the international recommendations that we have for different actors. First of all, to promote approaches to security. Multi-level and multidimensional approaches are central to addressing climate change. International actors and agencies can strive for multi-sectoral collaboration in the implementation of initiatives aiming to improve women's security in areas affected by climate crisis. Continue the support of local and environmental leaders. It is crucial that international actors and UN agencies continue to advocate for the protection of social leaders and environmental activists. Likewise, international actors can provide a broader platform to voice the messages and concerns that activists are raising, especially in conflict-affected settings. For national authorities, for the study, it is very important to ensure the provision of climate and gender sensitivity perspectives. The Colombian police have started already to incorporate climate and gender components within some of their units. To ensure the sustainability of these efforts, it is crucial to mainstream these components into national security policies and plans and to improve coordination between different agencies. Regarding the security approach from a multidimensional perspective, it is key to ensure the security of rural and indigenous communities. Governmental authorities must implement effective mitigation strategies to prevent soil degradation, loss of traditional farming methods, water pollution, and the use of herbicides to tackle illegal crops. It is key to guarantee meaningful engagement and informed participation of rural and indigenous women in decision-making and governance processes. Ensure that rural and indigenous women are engaged in consultation, design, and oversight processes of projects on environmental and security issues that could affect their livelihoods and ancestral practices. For the National Police of Colombia, it is very important to work more on confidence levels. And here we think it would be important that police can increase their levels of legitimacy by augmenting their presence in remote areas, their interaction with local communities, and monitoring and poor environmental practices, including those of private companies. Increasing police presence would enhance police visibility, and it can be a first step in fostering a sense of inclusion of women and local communities who feel very distant of the state. The police can approach environmental leaders and coordinate with other units and governmental institutions to provide protection when the personal security of activists, leaders, and communities are at risk. Create spaces for dialogue with rural and indigenous women. The interest expressed by women who participated in this study is increasing their knowledge to curb the effects of climate crisis could serve as an entry point to reinforce collaboration and increase confidence. During my actual mission to Colombia, Ecuador, and Peru, I have talked to several representatives of the national police and different stakeholders, and they're very interested to implement the recommendations of the studies that we're presenting today. We would like to operationalize these findings in concrete actions to contribute to the promotion to accountable security to address the climate crisis in the Amazon. I would like to stop here, and I would like to thank you for this opportunity, and many greetings from Quito, Ecuador. The connection is not easy, but we are here present. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Christina. The connection is not perfect, but better than we expected. So many thanks, and thanks for bringing us really, I think, into the realm of human security. I think a lot of what you just shared is also a good reminder that some of the most, maybe the more sustainable solutions to climate security challenges also come from other sectors. You've talked about agriculture, you've talked about health, and I'm sure we'll return to that. But for now, I want to now move on to give the floor to Cindy to talk a little bit about accountable security in the framework of principles.
Thanks a lot, Abigail. The concept of accountable security, when you break it down, is actually not a very new idea. It's really about the need for security institutions that are accountable and that provide security as a public good, that respects rule of law and human rights and the dignity of the populations affected, that work to support locally owned efforts at rebuilding security. So all the things that Christina talked about. But that's all very well and good, but we then need to look at what actually needs to change for this to become a reality. So I'm just going to talk about some of the results of the findings from the consultative processes that we've done and the work with actors on the ground around what it really means to deliver accountable security. And I've divided it into somewhat artificial categories, but one is about the shift in thinking and approaches, and then one section is about the shift in practice. So in terms of the thinking and the conceptualization, I mean, it's very clear that we need to broaden our perspective of what we think of as security. It's not just about physical safety, but well-being, freedom from fear, all the things that we're now calling human security in our sector's jargon. And as Christina mentioned, for example, in the study they did for Indigenous women, security wasn't just about physical well-being, but the freedom to practice their ancestral practices. And these are things that we don't typically consider to be under the mandate of the security forces. But in very many places across the world, and particularly in remote areas, oftentimes security forces are the only government institutions that are visible, or they're the largest ones. And so we need to think about how we can leverage their presence and their mandate to tackle human security from a broader perspective. Secondly, for accountable security, we really need to consider the specific perspectives and needs of different populations. So in the Colombia case, we've looked specifically at the needs of women, and like Christina said, a lot has been done globally and in specific countries around a more gendered perspective in terms of training, bringing more women into the armed forces. But overall, in the sector, there's still a lot of work needed to get to a really gendered approach, which means not only looking at the representation, but that the outcomes truly reflect the different specific needs. And one area in particular that we could consider more is this concept of masculinity. So we know that in security forces, there's a particular view of masculinity that's prized, which is about aggression and dominance and control and subjugation. So there's a lot of work that could be done in thinking about how that expression and conceptualization of masculinity within security apparatuses then translates into their behavior on the ground and whether they're able to provide human security. And finally, in terms of the conceptualization of security, when we talk about considering the needs of different groups like women, minorities, indigenous people, we also have to consider the diversity within those groups and not see them as a monolithic block. So again, if we come to the case of Colombia, an indigenous woman in Putumayo doesn't necessarily have the same security needs and perspectives as a woman in Bogota. So we need to be able to look at the different factors that intersect when it comes to security, age, gender, ethnicity, sexuality, economic class, and also recognize in which security climate certain identity factors may create different needs. So that's a bit in terms of our thinking. Now, in terms of our practice, I mean, Christina's covered a lot of it in terms of the recommendations that come out of this report, which we fully align with. And the main thing is shifting from a very heavy focus on militarized and security approaches to addressing violence. We've seen that such a hard emphasis on hard security actually tends to create a permissive atmosphere for impunity and abuse. And that can have the opposite effect of driving people into armed groups and creating an even bigger gap with security forces. So we need to refocus around the security forces mandate as being one of protecting civilians, not as a punitive one. And overall, think of security as being there to enhance legitimacy. And that's not just about tangible outputs like reduction in number of deaths, but also perceptions around the security forces and their behavior. And a lot of that comes down to trust. So Christina mentioned the importance of confidence building. That's so critical because security forces can't be perceived to be complicit in some of the things that threaten human security, whether that's threats to physical security, such as torture, arbitrary detention, or threats to well-being, such as being involved in environmental degradation. So in practice, what that means is, of course, security forces and apparatus that respect human rights, rule of law, and actually are held accountable where there's abuses. We're talking about civilian oversight of armed forces, but also platforms where communities who are affected by violence can actually have meaningful and constructive conversations with security forces and decision makers about what security means to them and what they see as the threats to their lives and how they can work together with security forces. And finally, it means integrating localized and hybrid solutions. As Christina said, having a multi-sector, multi-level intervention. And one thing that's really important to note is that oftentimes a mission is considered successful when an insurgent group or people are driven out without realizing that those people actually had some legitimacy because they provided basic services, they provided jobs, they collected taxes, they provided a justice system. And if that's pushed out and nothing is going to fill the place in the absence of a strong central state, that actually is going to create a security vacuum. So it's important to look at that question of legitimacy and which actors on the ground can help fill certain gaps around human security. So I'll leave it at that because I'm really looking forward to hearing from the colleagues in Colombia about what they've seen on the ground and how we can better implement more effective and holistic approaches to human security.
Thanks a lot, Cindy. I think that sets the stage really nicely for the next part of our discussion with our colleagues from Colombia. And I want to pick up on one thing you said in particular, which is we need to find ways to leverage security sector mandates and presence in a more effective and a way that's more beneficial for local communities. And I think the Colombian National Police have extensive experience thinking about this and thinking about how to not just protect communities, but also the environment or the ecosystems they depend on. And so Colonel Franco, I'd like to give you the floor first and ask if you could talk a little bit about the specific challenges and opportunities the Colombian National Police face in dealing with the violence that's associated with environmental crime, with natural resource exploitation more broadly, and especially how you see this in regions of the country that are already profoundly affected by violent conflicts. Colonel Franco, over to you. The floor is yours.
Bueno, un cordial saludo, me disculpo porque mi inglés no es fluido. Quisiera contarles un poco que en estas dinámicas de transformación del sector seguridad, la Policía Nacional ha estado a la vanguardia con cada uno de los temas que se han venido tratando y principalmente porque nosotros somos los encargados de garantizar garantizar las libertades y los derechos públicos. Y esto está muy relacionado con garantizar la convivencia pacífica. La dinámica del conflicto se ha generado por más de 60 años y su origen principal justamente fue la distribución de las tierras. Pues a partir de ello se ha venido avanzando un poco y hemos reconocido esos derechos y la violencia a través de riesgos y escenarios que son desiguales frente a los derechos humanos y la dignidad. De esta manera, como nos lo han enunciado aquí nuestros panelistas, hay una población importante que ha sido desatendida durante el largo del tiempo. Por ello, desde la Policía Nacional hemos construido, diseñado y apropiado un modelo de construcción de paz, el cual genera acciones de manera anticipativa y preventiva, no represiva. A partir de ello, también se ha generado una articulación con la Dirección de Carabineros y Protección Ambiental, quienes hoy por hoy están liderando los temas ambientales en nuestro país en temas de seguridad. Pero aquí hay varios aspectos que también pues, deben tener en cuenta. Lo primero es que hemos identificado una falta de capacidades institucionales ante los problemas sensibles del clima y del género en las comunidades. Tenemos un enfoque diferencial donde estamos trabajando con poblaciones étnicas, campesinas, con un enfoque de género y etario, pero también hemos encontrado una ausencia de mecanismos de gobernanza e iniciativas comunitarias que permitan enfrentar estos conflictos ambientales. Y parte de esto, las políticas públicas no han sido articuladas en los últimos años, pues, o más bien, en el transcurso del tiempo no han sido diseñadas con las poblaciones. En los últimos años, sí, ya en el entorno de la gobernanza, hemos apropiado a las comunidades también en el marco de estas instancias para la generación de las políticas públicas. Y de ello hemos reconocido que también hay un desconocimiento sobre los impactos y los riesgos ambientales y la seguridad de las mujeres. Y eso también ocurre porque es necesario que diferenciemos las necesidades que hay entre cada una de las poblaciones, porque aquí hay, especialmente en Colombia, un fenómeno que se llama miedo, el miedo hacia los grupos armados ilegales. Como fuerza pública también tenemos el deber de garantizar esos derechos y tenemos también funciones de policía judicial. Eso quiere decir que nosotros trabajamos también con un énfasis frente a los delitos ambientales o el crimen que ocurre en cada una de nuestras ciudades. Y hay un aspecto también importante y relevante a tener en cuenta. Aproximadamente el 86% de las víctimas de las FARC son mujeres y las mujeres han sido instrumentalizadas y han sido mal llamado un botín de guerra. Esto nos lleva a nosotros a trabajar con todas las instituciones del Estado con el fin de prevenir estos actos de violencia. En proceso de paz, estamos en una implementación de acuerdos, pero también tenemos unas negociaciones en estas dinámicas de conflicto con otros grupos armados ilegales. En ese sentido, pues la policía enfrenta varios escenarios y retos para acudir con la ayuda de la cooperación internacional y especialmente con DICAF hemos identificado algunos de estos retos que estamos trabajando con el fin de mejorar también de nuestro servicio y también el acercamiento con las comunidades.
Thank you, Colonel Franco. I think those are excellent insights to begin our conversation about how things actually function right now in Colombia. And I really appreciate in particular the emphasis on giving communities an opportunity to play more of an active role in generating public policy. And also, I think an emphasis that we've seen throughout some of the studies DCAF has worked on recently that you kind of can't separate challenges for the environment, you know, environmental crime, for example, and violence against the environment from violence against women, which has been an ongoing problem for decades now in Colombia. So thank you for, I think, bringing those two forms of violence together in what you've shared initially. With that, I would like to at least try to give the floor to Nazareth if her connectivity will permit this. And if not, Maria Paula, I would ask you to step in and perhaps respond on Nazareth's behalf. But I'd like to ask Nazareth first, you know, if you can talk a little bit about how climate change is currently impacting indigenous communities in the Colombian Amazon, you know, both in terms of livelihoods and in terms of security.
Hola, Nazaret, ¿estás por ahí?
Give us a moment, Maria Paula. I think we're switching the interpretation, but we can hear you perfectly.
Sorry for that. Just let's give it a minute. If I try to know if Nazaret is here. She was here a minute ago.
We did see her on the screen. I think you may have to go ahead, Maria Paula.
Paulita, ¿me escuchan?
Sí, sí, dale, ¿y puedes activar la cámara, NASA?
Ay, espérate que me puse en... ¿Cómo hago?
Tienes que quitarle la línea rojita a donde aparece la cámara, el video.
Espérate, a ver si logro. Ya.
¿Ya? A ver.
Ya, ahora sí. Digo la primera pregunta.
La primera, la primera respuesta, pero creo que la cámara todavía no está allí. Espérame.
Sorry, Nazareth and Maria Paula, give us just a moment.
Nazaret, ¿me escuchas?
Sí, te escucho.
¿Puedes activar la cámara o porque todavía no te ves? Te escucho, pero no te veo.
This is the fun part.
Right. You were warned ahead of time that this would be a complicated hybrid session.
For this room.
Nazareth is talking again.
Yeah. They don't.
Otherwise, Nazaret simplemente habla. Si puedes
Listo.
hablar, sería perfecto. Y así
Listo,
lo
sí.
dejamos. Sí, Nazaret, puedes simplemente responder la pregunta. Gracias.
Listo, Nasa, si quieres responder la primera pregunta, no te preocupes todavía por el tema de aparecer o no. Habla si quieres, dale.
Pero me escucha, ellos me están escuchando.
Sí,
Es que
te
no.
están escuchando. Sí, tranquila, te están escuchando súper bien. Dale entonces, no te preocupes.
You can hear perfectly.
Hola, Nasa.
¿Escuchando?
Sí, ahora sí, es que se te está silenciando. Habla, dale de una, puedes empezar.
Mi nombre es Nazaret Cabrera, de la etnia Huitoto, del departamento de Amazonas, Caquetá. Un saludo en especial en representación de las mujeres amazónicas y de la Fundación Natura con la Red de Mujeres Interétnicas de Colombia.
Listo, Nasa, si quieres puedes responder la primera pregunta. Ya se ve. Ajá, ahora activa el micrófono.
Fantastic.
We are trying to do our best. Sorry for that. Listo. No se te está escuchando, Nasa. Si quieres activa el micrófono, ahora es quitarle el micrófono. La rayita roja tiene que estar en blanco. Ujú.
¿Ahora sí?
Sí, ahora sí, habla. Responde la primera pregunta. Ajá.
Bueno, ¿Cómo ha afectado el cambio climático a las comunidades indígenas de la Amazonía colombiana, tanto en términos de medios de vida como de seguridad? El cambio climático ha afectado a nuestras comunidades en 3 medidas. 1, se agotan los recursos naturales. La Amazonía está pidiendo a voces generar una conciencia real en los países desarrollados para detener la producción masiva y extensiva de la agricultura, la minería legal o ilegal y la contaminación del agua. 2, vivimos en zonas lejanas de los centros de las ciudades. A pesar de tener y cuidar nuestro territorio, no podemos frenar el ingreso de la violencia, porque pondría en riesgo a nuestros propios pueblos. Por tanto, entendemos que cada una de las acciones que se hacen sobre la tierra y el agua tienen afectaciones a todos los seres vivos que estamos allí. 3, la no educación de las nuevas generaciones que no está generando un compromiso real, desde el más niño hasta el más adulto. Si promoviéramos una educación que pueda enseñar a todos la importancia de las acciones colectivas y lo fuerte que son para cambiar y transformar el mundo.
Listo, Nasa. Súper. Esperemos a ver.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Nazareth. I think, you just brought such an important dimension into the conversation in terms of education and really, I think, shifting consciousness around some of the issues we're talking about. We were talking before the session about often going for more formal institutional solutions, and yet at the end of the day, our institutions are built on human consciousness and awareness. And so thank you for the reminder of the transformative power of shifting that awareness. Maybe Colonel Franco, I can turn back to you, at least briefly, and ask you now, just reflecting on what Nazareth has just mentioned and some of these challenges that Indigenous and local communities face, how does the Colombian National Police collaborate right now with local and Indigenous communities to address security issues that are related to climate change and environmental harm or environmental degradation? Colonel Franco, over to you.
Bueno, en el territorio, a través de acciones como el diálogo y la consulta, iniciamos un proceso para poder entender de una mejor manera cómo las poblaciones indígenas han venido sufriendo no solo la inclemencia de la guerra y los temas de seguridad, sino también esto cómo está asociado al cambio climático y los delitos también ambientales. Entonces, lo que se ha realizado con nuestras unidades de policía, independientemente del rol de mujer o hombre, es que nuestros policías en el territorio ya tienen una cercanía mucho mayor con las poblaciones indígenas y esto les ha permitido crear una construcción de confianza y legitimidad en el territorio donde históricamente no había hecho presencia el Estado. Entonces, nosotros como Policía Nacional hemos sido unos puentes y unos gestores entre las otras entidades del Estado con el fin de poder, de alguna manera, intervenir o ayudar a la solución de muchas problemáticas que también están asociadas a las necesidades básicas insatisfechas de estas poblaciones. Aquí ha jugado un rol importante la articulación con las instituciones del Estado, incluso también con las fuerzas militares, con el fin de poder no solo abordar esta problemática a través de acciones de combatir el crimen, sino también de hacer acciones anticipativas y de prevención con las comunidades de manera dialogada y que permita dar paso a unos entendimientos y nosotros también aprender de ellos, de su cultura, de su cosmovisión, porque eso también ha sido muy importante en el desarrollo de esta tarea con el trabajo de las comunidades.
Thank you so much, Colonel Franco. I think just another emphasis on, or another way of thinking about what Cindy talked about earlier with accountable security being a ultimately being relational and involving listening and really understanding community needs. And I know the Colombian National Police has a strong focus on that. I know we're running a little bit behind, but Nazareth, I'd like to give you the floor one more time before we open it up for questions and discussion with our audience. Now thinking about this from the other perspective, we've asked Colonel Franco to talk about collaboration with communities. I'd like to ask you, from your experience, how do you think governments and specifically security forces can better engage with and support Indigenous communities in addressing some of these security challenges while still respecting the key rights and the autonomy of Indigenous communities? So Nazareth, if you're still with us, over to you to answer this next question.
Nasa, ¿puedes prender la cámara? ¿Nos estás escuchando? Nazareth. Nazareth. Hola, Nasa, ¿me estás escuchando?
Perfecto.
Listo.
Ahora sí.
Nasa, ajá, están preguntando que cómo se agrega o podemos resaltar en términos de gobernanza acciones que hayan hecho las comunidades indígenas, un poco para entender cómo ha sido la transformación en términos de cambio climático y seguridad. Ellos quieren preguntar cómo por estas estrategias. Entonces yo creo que está muy asociado a esta segunda pregunta que ya nos habían mandado. Entonces si quieres puedes responderla.
Listo. ¿Ya?
Sí. Ya, de una, todos te están escuchando.
Bueno, ¿qué conocimientos y prácticas tradicionales han utilizado las comunidades indígenas para adaptarse al cambio climático? ¿Y cómo pueden integrarse en estrategias más amplias de resiliencia climática? Como pueblo huitoto, desde siglos pasados, hemos mantenido nuestra sabiduría ancestral con el círculo de la palabra. ¿A qué me refiero? Se refiere a las charlas nocturnas, espacios de diálogo con la naturaleza, con sus guardianes, en oraciones. Se pide ayuda a la Madre Selva en momentos críticos para cuidarnos en salud mental, corporal, espiritual, energética. En fin, somos descendientes de la extracción de la goma de caucho por la Peruvian Company y el Estado inglés, en el cual perecieron muchos clanes de diferentes pueblos indígenas de la Amazonía colombiana. La madre naturaleza es muy sabia, es nuestra maestra y cuidadora. Si nuestros niños no salen de su entorno social, cultural y territorial, mantendremos viva ese entender de su sentir por medio de los fenómenos de la naturaleza.
Bien.
Thank you, Nazareth. I think it's good to be reminded also, I think, as Christina also mentioned earlier, of the strength and resilience and ultimately security that comes from traditional practices as well. So thank you for that. And with that, although I have many follow-up questions I would like to ask personally, I think we want to open it up now for questions from and discussion with our audience. And I would just ask that anyone either raising their hand in the room or submitting questions using the Q&A function in Zoom, please be, in the interest of time, as concise and clear with your questions as possible. Formulate them as a question, not a statement, and ideally direct them to one of our Colombian speakers in particular, so we can manage time well. So many thanks to our speakers so far, and the floor is open first, I think, for some questions from the room, and then we'll take a few questions from online participants as well. So I think I saw a hand here. Please go ahead.
Thank you. My name is Patrick Nikish. I'm a member of the ecosystem of the Massive Change Network, amongst other organizations. I have a question to Ms. Nazareth Cabrera. She was mentioning that spoken word circle every evening. And how would she see that people in the West or the rest of the world who lost connection with nature and communication with nature, what would she recommend how we can start learning again what we have forgotten?
Excellent.
They still practice.
Excellent question. Let me maybe take one or two more here, and then we'll pose these questions to the panel. So anybody else in the room? Other questions? Yeah. Lucas, please.
Yeah, thanks. Lucas from Adelphi. My question is around the protection of environmental defenders. And I would invite anyone who has maybe lessons learned or good practices, what has proven successful to better protect environmental defenders?
Great. Thanks for that question. Good. Then let's start with those two questions. Yeah, please. Sorry, we'll do one more. Go ahead, Peter.
Yes, I have a question for Colonel Franco, maybe just because this is an issue that comes up also in the Brazil case study on the transnational, transboundary work. If you could give us some sense about maybe cooperation, collaboration with neighboring countries in terms of environmental issues as well, and how you're dealing with that problem. Thanks.
Thanks, Peter. So first, maybe Colonel Franco, I can give you the floor to respond to the question Peter just asked about the transboundary elements of some of the security challenges we're discussing, and then also your thoughts in response to Lucas's question about what has worked well, what has been effective in protecting environmental defenders in these environments. So over to you first, Colonel Franco.
Las actividades que hemos desarrollado con el trabajo frente al impacto ambiental ha sido a través de la promoción de prácticas sostenibles y el empoderamiento de la comunidad en los territorios. Y de pronto, para ayudarle un poquitico a Nazaret, la intención de estas prácticas no es que ellos cambien su cultura, sino que por el contrario lo que tratamos es de fortalecer la cultura indígena y nosotros más bien aprender de ellos y adaptarnos a ellos. Entonces, esto juega un papel también fundamental. También hemos realizado ejercicios de gobernanza ambiental asociados obviamente con la cultura y con hemos realizado varias actividades frente a hemos realizado recursos hídricos, que para nosotros también es muy importante en los territorios, y la biodiversidad. La educación ambiental ha jugado un rol importante en esta tarea, primero capacitándonos nosotros y nosotros también transmitiéndole esta formación a las comunidades, así como acercarlos a ellos un poco más al Estado y contarles cuáles son esos escenarios a los que ellos pueden acudir para generar este tipo de transformaciones.
Excellent. Thanks, Colonel Franco. I might ask a follow-up question in just a moment, but first, Nazaret, I'd like to turn to you and ask if you could answer two of these questions as well. First, we'd be interested in your thoughts on whether you have seen effective approaches to protecting environmental defenders who are at real risk right now in Colombia and in other countries. And then the second question, also an important one, you mentioned the spoken word circle, and the question was, and correct me if I don't get this right, essentially, looking at communities, at society in the West, what would you offer to us as advice, for societies which have lost that connection with the earth, with nature? What do you think that we could do to restore that connection? So Nazaret, over to you.
Hola, Nasa. ¿Me estás escuchando, Nasa?
Sí, dime.
Listo. Nos hacen una primera pregunta y es que subrayes o puedas decir logros como logros o ganancias que han tenido los líderes indígenas, sobre todo las lideresas mujeres, para proteger el medio ambiente en la zona. Entonces, si quieres, puedes mencionar uno o dos y luego te digo que hicieron dos preguntas, esa es la primera. Entonces, si quieres, puedes responder esa y luego te cuento de la segunda. Entonces, ¿qué logros o como alcances o cosas que hayan alcanzado lideresas indígenas para proteger el ambiente allá en Amazonía, pues específicamente en Araraquara? ¿Cuáles te gustaría compartir? Puedes responder. Ya.
En primer lugar, las mujeres lideresas que hemos batallado supremamente con todo lo que se dice del machismo. Ha sido la lucha de muchas lideresas antecedidas a la nuestra, por la que con ayuda de como fundaciones, porque nosotras solas económicamente no somos de plata, no tenemos dinero, entonces con la ayuda de fundaciones como la Fundación Natura, que nos apoya en todos estos quehaceres, en todos estos saberes, en todos estos compartires, hemos podido alzar la voz ante el Estado y con el Estado, mas no con armas, no. El pueblo amazónico no es de armas, el pueblo amazónico es de diálogo, es de palabra. Por eso los ancianos y las ancianas siempre nos dicen tener la palabra dulce, el corazón dulce, no de armas. El corazón no está hecho de plomo ni de nada que se oxide, sino de amor, de ternura y de comprensión a todo el hermano, la hermana naturaleza, la madre naturaleza, quien en primer lugar es la que debemos respetar.
Thanks, Nazareth, for that. And also the reminder that none of us can do this alone, especially in some of these most challenging environments. Maria Paula, do you want to ask the second question quickly again? So again, about how those of us who have lost our connection with nature, which is such a source of strength and security for indigenous communities, can restore that.
Nasa, la segunda pregunta tiene que ver con cómo la gente blanca, la gente de Occidente, puede recuperar esos lazos o esas conexiones con la naturaleza. Es como que si tú tuvieras que darle un consejo a quienes te estamos escuchando, como gente de afuera, gente de Occidente, gente blanca, ¿qué nos podrías aconsejar para volver a reconectarnos con la naturaleza, con esa madre de origen? ¿Qué consejos les darías tú a todos y a todas?
En primer lugar, para mí, desde que he tenido conocimiento, reuniones, es el sistema de educación que nos han impuesto desde el occidente. No nos reconocen a nuestros ancianos, la palabra de nuestros ancianos. Siempre nos enseñan lo de Platón, lo de Aristóteles y todos esos filósofos, cuando nosotros como pueblos indígenas tenemos nuestra propia filosofía ancestral, desde antes de los antes, y aún seguimos resistiendo y resiliendo frente a toda esa sabiduría que nos han dejado, a pesar de todos los problemas que hemos tenido en lo que se dice el anticulturismo. Yo creo que para mí es el sistema educativo que tiene que cambiar. No la gente, es el sistema educativo. Gracias.
Nasa, pero no te vayas a desconectar. ¿Crees que si ese sistema educativo cambiara también para la gente, para nuestra gente blanca, podría tener una relación diferente con la naturaleza? ¿Tú crees que es por la educación de la gente blanca que puede replantearse eso? ¿O qué dirías? ¿Cómo que le dirías a alguien que quiere de nosotros, como gente blanca, conectarse con la naturaleza? ¿Cómo podríamos hacerlo?
Paula, lo primero es venir y conectarse con la naturaleza, porque tú sabes que la educación se impone desde un aula, desde 4 paredes, más no como tú sabes que en el nuestro con la chagra, el ir al río, la madrugada, las charlas nocturnas, o sea, es una diferencia, es un sistema educativo que existía y hacía una diferencia. Pero como después nos mandan a estudiar en 4 paredes con compañeros y después a la secundaria nos tendremos que salir fuera de esto y a la universidad fuera de esto, entonces por eso es que yo digo que es el sistema educativo el que tiene que cambiar.
Listo, Nasa. Muchas gracias.
Bueno.
Thanks a lot, Nazareth. I mean, thank you for continuing to remind us of the value of respect and connection, with one another and with the environment around us. And again, how we can think about that as a source of safety and security, which is sometimes we often forget, or something we often forget. So I know we need to wrap up, but we saw one other hand raised here. So I think we will take one other question here in the room rather than online, and then we'll wrap up. So please go ahead.
Hi, my name is Angelo. I'm a student at the Geneva Graduate Institute from Honduras, and I just had a question on the one of the difficulties that I know is faced in a lot of Latin America, but particularly in the Amazon basin, which is the presence of narco traffickers. And I want to know that, at what degree does it affect the objectives and the strategies that you are trying to implement? And on top of that, do you feel like you receive some sort of support from the authorities, from the government, in order to tackle these challenges? Because I know that one of the issues is that indigenous populations are, above all, subjugated by these narco trafficking groups into performing illegal activities, and have also contributed to the deforestation of the Amazon basin through these activities. So I want to know, like, what I know for a fact that this has to cause some complications in promoting this mission that you have. And I want to know, like, what strategies have you taken in order to tackle this issue?
Can I assume that's a question for both of our speakers?
Yes. Yes.
Absolutely.
Correct.
Okay. Let me then turn it over, and we'll ask you to be brief because we need to wrap up. But Colonel Franco, did you hear these questions? I mean, excellent questions on, the presence of narco traffickers on the territory, how that affects your policies, your strategies, and then also a question about how communities are supported from the government side in addressing these threats. So Colonel Franco, we'll give you the last word here, and then we'll turn it over to Nazareth one more time.
Gracias.
Thank you for the question.
Bueno, el gobierno nacional ha transitado de la lucha del narcotráfico, suprimiendo la aspersión para, digamos que contrarrestar estos cultivos ilícitos, a uno de sustitución de cultivos ilícitos por proyectos productivos. Entonces, en algunas zonas de la región, hace aproximadamente 6 años se viene trabajando en esa sustitución de cultivos ilícitos, pero la verdad ha sido un tema bastante complejo y que requiere de recursos. Entonces, seguramente la población no se ve tan reflejada en esa actividad porque prácticamente los narcotraficantes recogen la hoja de coca o recogen el producto en donde ellos viven y es pago, mientras que el tema de la sustitución de los cultivos requiere de una maduración más allá de 6 meses o 1 año para que pueda salir la siembra. Por ejemplo, en el caso de la agricultura, y eso no les permite una adquisición económica mucho más rápida para sus necesidades. Entonces ha sido un tema bastante complejo. Adicional a eso, el tema del desarrollo como tal del país en estas jurisdicciones rurales no tienen vías hasta donde se encuentran las fincas, sino que hay unas vías terciarias que no son pavimentadas, que se dificulta el acceso de los vehículos. Entonces ha sido realmente todo un reto para los gobiernos poder implementar la sustitución de los cultivos ilícitos. Hay muchas zonas donde se ha logrado con la participación de las comunidades y que hoy por hoy también son procesos exitosos de exportación con apoyo también del gobierno y de la cooperación internacional que ha jugado un rol importante en todo este proceso.
Thanks, Colonel Franco. And again, a reminder that the different dimensions of human security, including economic security and physical security, tend to go hand in hand. So I want to then give the floor once more to wrap up to Nazareth. Nazareth, we'd also like to hear your thoughts on this question that was asked about the challenge posed by the presence of narco traffickers on the territory, and how that affects you, what support you receive from the government in dealing with that particular challenge.
NASA, ¿estás escuchando?
Sí, pero ¿cuál es la
Está-
pregunta?
La pregunta es, tú dices si la puedes responder, pues porque uno también sabe que estás en un contexto difícil y ahí hay otra gente escuchándote en la zona. La
Ujú.
pregunta es sobre cuáles han sido como los retos como comunidades indígenas para manejar el tema del narcotráfico en la zona y si ustedes sienten que el gobierno ha dado garantías para ese tema en la zona. ¿Puedes responder esa pregunta? Porque si no puedes, pues la puedo
Bueno, ¿me
responder yo.
escuchas?
Sí,
Bueno, sí, pues, sí, respóndela tú.
sí, la respondo yo.
Sí,
Listo, vale.
por favor.
Entonces, well, we have first, it's hi, everyone is listening. I hope so. This is a difficult question, and if you see, Nazareth can answer that question because she's she has a really high vulnerability, a high risk to answer this question there. You know, if there are some other people who are listening to her and hablo en español o hablo en inglés como quieran. Cristina, me indicas porfis. No te estoy
En
Ok.
español mejor.
Nazaret no puede responder esta pregunta porque precisamente está en un momento y en una situación de riesgo bastante alta y por eso la voy a responder yo. Ella no está sola allí, ella hay otras personas que la están escuchando, que están precisamente en una dinámica en la cual ellos no pueden hablar de estos temas porque están siendo carnetizados, seguidos y escuchados en esta zona. Entonces, por eso, para mitigar un poco el riesgo, la voy a responder yo. Entonces, ella me estaba contando por WhatsApp que lo que han hecho un poco como para unirse o entender estas dinámicas del narcotráfico es primero evitar cualquier tipo de conflictividad con los grupos armados al margen de la ley que están promoviendo estas dinámicas en el territorio, porque si ellos no entran en conflicto con estos actores, pueden pasar tres cosas. Uno, reclutamiento de niños o niñas en las zonas donde ellos están viviendo. Dos, pues amenazas o hostigaciones en sus trabajos, en sus lugares de dispersión o de trabajo, no solamente se refiere a las fincas o a las áreas productivas, sino que muchos de ellos también tienen trabajos al interior de los municipios. Entonces, si ellos se ponen en contra de lo que están diciendo los actores armados, pues no pueden hacer su vida normal. Ahorita Nazaret trabaja en un lugar y ella está carnetizada no solamente por el lugar donde trabaja, sino por los actores armados. Tienen ritmos, horarios y quienes fallen, bien sea como docentes o si están desempeñándose mal en su trabajo, si llegan tarde, van a tener serias consecuencias porque estos grupos armados tienen el control en la zona. Por eso ya no puede responder esta pregunta. No pueden salir del territorio, están, además de que les digo que tienen un carnet para que serán reconocidos por estos actores armados, tienen unos horarios que cumplir, hay horarios después donde no pueden salir, pero también no pueden incluso salir de su territorio. Nosotros como fundación tenemos que hacer varios talleres con ella y tuvimos que pedir permiso no solo a su jefe laboralmente, sino también ella tuvo que decirles a estos actores que tenía que salir del territorio para que no le pasara nada. Entonces, su actitud tiene que ser muy de agachar la cabeza, un tema de nobleza, de validación, un poco como de lo que ellos digan y hagan allá, porque nadie va a ponerse en discusión. Los que se pongan en discusión, sus consecuencias son ese hostigamiento, esas amenazas o la muerte, en pocas palabras. Entonces, ellos no tienen alternativa para esto. Conocen y saben que las rutas en términos de los ríos por Amazonía colombiana y Brasil son cada vez más estrechas y duras. También hay gente de las comunidades que participa, bien sea porque es una alternativa económica o lo que sea, en parte de estas actividades. Sin embargo, no tienen poder de agencia y de decisión en estos espacios. Nada más el hecho, y qué pena ser tan reiterativa, que Nazaret no pueda responder esta pregunta, hace parte de cómo el control social, la biopolítica del poder tan grande en la zona no le permita responder y hablar tan abiertamente de este tema. Seguramente hay acciones por parte del gobierno nacional para mitigar esto, pero como ella lo respondió en su primera pregunta, es una zona tan alejada que a veces sale la jurisdicción física y gubernamental del Estado para tomar acción y control. Y si bien los pueblos indígenas tienen autonomía y gobernanza propia, pues se está viendo limitada por la inserción de esas otras economías en el territorio. Ya no son un actor armado, sino son varios actores armados que incluso no puede que no correspondan a una causa militante comunista, por así decirlo, como las viejas guerrillas de los años 70, sino que son actores criminales y eso cambia su discurso y la forma de actuar en el territorio. Ya no son uno, son dos, son tres, son varios, entonces uno no reconoce tampoco quiénes son y pues ellos simplemente tienen que tener más una actitud de aplacarse, seguir normas si ellos quieren que sus familias, su cultura y sus comunidades estén bien. Eso es.
Thanks, Maria Paula, and certainly Nazaret for being willing to share what you shared with us. Unfortunately, we are going to have to wrap up right now. I am not even going to attempt to pull together everything you shared into a few quick comments. We will do that at the end of our next session, which will focus on Brazil. But I do want to say a big thank you, Colonel Franco, to you, Nazaret, to you, Maria Paula as well, for the insights and really the wisdom you shared with us today and your perspectives. Thank you, Christina and Cindy as well. For those of you who are going to stay with us for the Brazil discussion, I believe we're going to begin at 4:40. So in about 10 or 15 minutes, we'll come back together after our coffee break, and we will look forward to seeing you then. We hope you do stay with us, and many thanks again. Very grateful for everyone's participation and also to our audience, and we'll see you in a few minutes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Abby. Thank you.
For those of you who are going to transition to another room, in the big room next to us will be Haiti. And then in the two small rooms is Liptako Gorma, and the small businesses is Agents for Change. And we'll start in about 15 minutes. Thank you, Annika.
Great.
I know it's always a little tricky with the text.
No, that was worth it. Definitely to have her voice was really important. No, it was fun. Absolutely fun.
Hi, how are you?
Yeah, she did a fantastic job.
She's done. Peter is in our
Maria Paula also. That worked perfectly.
How do you go back?
Sorry, I would have liked to give everybody one last word.
No, I think it was invisible, that we wouldn't get through.
I hope you stay.
You can get 2 rounds.
Yeah, exactly.
Classic.
Exactly.
And, yeah, really great that she managed.
It's like, excuse me, but
Yeah, yes, I know. I understand. Yeah.
Still want to talk.
as you know.
Oh my God.
An absolute time
Or
of
the
5:30.
Okay, for the plenary.
Yeah, because then we're gonna move to the
He said it's Spanish.
Okay. Tatiana? Yeah, perfect. Okay.
Tatiana here.
Yeah, just checking to make sure. We know we can't do anything without you, Tatiana. We're clear on that. Okay. Let me welcome everyone in the room and online back if you were with us for the first part of this session. And otherwise, welcome for the first time to our session on exploring the nexus between climate change and human security perspectives from the Amazon basin. For those of you I haven't already introduced myself to, my name is Abby Robinson. I'm moderating this session, which focuses on looking at two cases in the Amazon basin, Colombia and Brazil, to really explore these connections between climate change and human security from the perspective of different actors on the ground. And so we're looking not just at this nexus of climate change and security, but also really thinking about and understanding concepts of accountability, security, what these actually mean in these different contexts, and what they mean for longer term peace and prosperity in particular. We've already talked about that in the Colombian context, and now we are going to move on to talking specifically about Brazil. And for those of you just joining us online, we have interpretation available in Spanish and English, so if you need to use that, please just select the appropriate channel using that function in Zoom. And with that, I am very pleased to be able to introduce our speakers for this next session. First is Peter Batchelor, a senior advisor with Principles for Peace. Next, Diego Garcia is a project officer with the Latin America and Caribbean unit at the Geneva Center for Security Sector Governance, otherwise known as DCAF. Maria Teresa Gonzalez is joining us online. She's a consultant with DCAF and also a program manager and content developer at World Goodwill. Tassio Franchi is a researcher and professor at the Brazilian Army Command and General Staff College with the Ministry of Defense in Brazil. Welcome, Tassio. And Rafael Pereira de Melo is a national coordinator at the Jesuit Migrant and Refugee Service in Brazil, who specialized in migration, forced displacement, and refugees. And so once again, we're going to look at some of these issues from the perspective of the formal security sector and also the perspective of communities. And to set the stage for our conversation with our colleagues in Brazil today, we're going to ask first Diego and Maria to very briefly share with us some key findings and recommendations from research which DCAF has done over the past couple of years on climate security in Brazil. And then we'll ask Peter also to share some thoughts on accountable security as a key principle for peace. So let me turn it over, I think, Diego, first to you for some thoughts from recent research.
Thank you, Abby. Yes, I think my role here is to present just a little bit very briefly on the introduction of this study and also the key findings and key recommendations of that resulted from our study that we conducted last year. The study, you have a hard copy here, but it's also available online on the DCAF website in Spanish, Portuguese, and English. The name is Stocktaking of Security Sector Roles in Climate and Environmental Security in Brazil. And this was part of a more broader study that we have conducted in other countries. But for the sake of this conversation, we just limit this to Brazil. So the study, the focus of the study was to try to understand the potential and also the limitations of the security sector in climate change adaptation, disaster risk reduction, and environmental protection. The methodology consisted basically on a literature review. We also conducted semi-structured interviews to different security sector actors in Brazil. And also we did a workshop with the participation of community leaders and residents of flood-affected areas from indigenous and Venezuelan origin. This workshop was conducted in Roraima. It's in the state of Roraima, is in the northern region of Brazil, which is part of the Brazilian legal Amazon. And we chose Roraima basically because in the last years, it has been facing a highest population increase in the country due to the arrival of migrants, mostly from Venezuelan origin. And their vulnerable situation makes them very particularly exposed to climate change impact. So that's why we decided to work with them. And in particular, we work with the Jesuit Migrant and Refugee Service, and Rafael will expand this a little bit further. Among the main findings that we identified, I would like to highlight just three. They are actually quite positive. That the first one being that the security sector in Brazil is already engaged in climate change adaptation, disaster risk reduction, and environmental protection. Brazil has a security sector, has a very sophisticated structure in place for this matter. And overall, there is a bigger focus on response rather than prevention. But this can partially be explained by the fact that environmental security is part of a complex institutional web that requires coordination between multiple stakeholders and not only the security sector. The second finding is that Brazil has developed robust capacities for disaster risk reduction and environmental protection, despite having many challenges, for example, its vast territorial extension. To compensate these challenges, for example, satellite mapping and remote monitoring technologies have been key to overcome these resource limitations. However, we have detected that these capacities vary significantly among different levels of governance and security sector institutions. For example, the early warning systems are more widespread and accessible in large urban areas, and while rural communities have more difficulties as accessing these mechanisms. And the third finding is that these communities that we work with are very willing to participate, and they're already playing a key role in environmental security. And in fact, the security sector actors that we interviewed, they emphasize that the value of these indigenous people approaches to disaster risk reduction and environmental conservation. And also, they also emphasize also the high level of preparedness of them for some local communities. So, however, just one thing is, as in other countries of the world, we detected that there is still an area of opportunity for strengthening the relationship and trust and confidence between the security sector actors and the local communities. And I would like to give the floor to Maria so she can brief you on the main recommendations that we gave to the security sector actors.
Thank you very much, Diego, and hello to everyone. I'm going to provide a brief summary of some of the recommendations that we have on the study, but as Diego mentioned, we invite you to read the publication. It's available on our website. Our first recommendation is to prioritize operations that target the humanitarian, development, and security nexus in a holistic manner, as they are more likely to be effective for disaster risk reduction and environmental protection. Experience shows that repressive approaches to counter environmental crimes are less effective over the longer term. They may have a quick effect as they result in the arrest of people involved in illegal activities. However, this effect is only temporary, and a new problem is created due to the loss of people's livelihoods and the absence of income alternatives. While more time and effort may be required upfront, we recommend creating integrated solutions that address the development of alternative livelihood programs, as well as enforcing environmental law, because this is more likely to succeed over the longer term. Our second recommendation is to strengthen the relationship between security sector actors and local communities. We've learned that effective security provision requires working closely with local communities. Droughts and flooding, as well as illegal operations in logging, mining, or land use, can be approached by integrating communities' participation in environmental education, early warning systems, and also alternative livelihood programs. These actions, however, require a good understanding of the needs of these local communities but also strengthening the trust and confidence on the security sector. And our third recommendation is to support cooperation among security sector actors of neighboring countries. As we all know, climate change and environmental risks are not limited by national boundaries. For example, the Amazon is a natural corridor for criminal organizations. Cooperation initiatives that allow for lesson learned exchanges involving security sector actors from federal, state, and municipal levels can strengthen the effectiveness of environmental protection operations. In addition, experience with other law enforcement initiatives has also shown that it is important to identify and address practical barriers which may exist, for example, to sharing sensitive information as part of cross-border efforts to strengthen investigations and close gaps in enforcement. Thank you.
Thanks, Maria. With that, let me turn it over to Peter to talk just a little bit about what accountable security means in this context and why it's so important.
Thanks, Abby, and thanks, Diego and Maria, for the introduction on the study. So just a little bit of a recap on human security and accountable security. I mean, I think as Cindy and others have already mentioned, the concept of human security has become, I think, much more well known in recent years, particularly as it is seen as a more holistic concept that considers a broad range of factors and threats to people's well-being, their livelihoods, their personal safety and security, and their dignity. So we at the Principles for Peace Foundation fully subscribe to the concept of human security that is now being used. And of course, as Cindy mentioned, we have the strong emphasis on accountable security, looking particularly at security actors or security institutions and how they should be promoting a more accountable security. And Cindy had mentioned some of the elements of this, but maybe just to recap a little bit in light of the Brazil study. I'm very much focused on security as a public good, so providing security to all populations, not exclusively to only certain segments of the population. Very much people-centered, focusing on equal treatment, the whole issue of trust, which is one of the issues that obviously has come up before. Then looking at the mandate or the mission of the security actors, the issues of oversight and regulation, of course, upholding the rule of law, respect for human rights, international law, the issue of representation, more inclusive institutions, whether it's in terms of composition or leadership. A point I think that came out very strongly in the last discussion on Colombia was locally owned solutions to promoting security or more human security. And finally, addressing the underlying drivers of violence and conflict, which of course we see climate change and environmental issues as being critical. So that's how we sort of see accountable security. And I think as one looks at the Brazil study, as you said, Diego, there's some quite positive findings which are nice to acknowledge, of course. But I guess the question back to you and to our discussion today is, do we feel that the security actors in Brazil are meeting relatively good standards in terms of accountable security in their interactions with the communities that they're engaging with, particularly insofar as it relates to climate change and environmental security issues? We know that there's been a long history in Brazil of tensions between indigenous communities and national security actors, and so that would be something we'd want to look at. But I was very glad to hear about the integrated approach that's being adopted by the security forces or the security actors. I think that's important, and that links nicely to the human security approach, which we've been discussing. Clearly, there is good work happening with communities, and that's important, again, in terms of the concept of accountable security being very much focused on local solutions and engaging with local actors to help promote their security through more participatory approaches. And then obviously the point of the transboundary cooperation, very important. Finally, just wanted to add on some of the things we were talking about in the earlier conversation around the mission or mandate of the security actors. I mean, how they see their role insofar as it relates to climate change and environmental security. I mean, that's clearly a shift that's happening with all security actors globally, particularly on issues like disaster risk reduction and environmental security. So that's one thing we can look at. The second is around their capacities. Do they have sufficient capacity and training to deal with these issues? And then thirdly, their engagement with local communities. How is that being done? Is it being done in a very collaborative fashion? or was it sort of very much top down and potentially also somewhat repressive? Because we know that there have, of course, been examples of where security actors have acted in a quite repressive fashion in relation to some of these sort of issues. So interesting to reflect on some of those. But thanks again for a great study, very comprehensive, and I think some really rich findings and useful recommendations. Thanks.
Thanks a lot, Peter. That's a great way, I think, to frame our conversation now on Brazil, and really refers back to a lot of what we heard in the earlier part of this conversation on Colombia. And thanks, Diego and Maria as well. You know, and you mentioned, I think, that climate change has sort of a multidimensional impact across various aspects of human security. And so, Tassio, I'd like to give you the floor first and ask you to tell us about, you know, how climate change is, you know, concretely impacting security in Brazil right now. Over to you, Tassio.
Hello. First, thank you to the CAF for this invitation. And I think the second, I would say something for the audience. It's very important, this kind of event, because you could think about the complex issues. Yeah. But, well, let's go straight to the question. Yeah, we are here to talk about Brazil. Think how the climate change currently impact the security in Brazil. Well, first thing is Brazil is a continent. Yep, Brazil is a huge. It's 18,000 square kilometers. The north channel of Amazon rivers is above Ecuador, and the south part of the country is below the Tropic of Capricorn. It's more than 400 kilometers far one each other's, and because that. Why the climate change affect Brazil is very different in very different ways in each region. Yeah, we must keep this in mind. It's very different. Including Amazon, you have different Amazons. You have some Amazons it's more connected to the river dynamics, and you have other Amazons more connected to the road dynamics. Yeah, because that it's very different place. Yeah, I will try to talk about just a few examples. One way of the climate change hardly affect Brazil. It's through more the extreme weather. Yeah, like IPCC showed this in the reports, and we're feeling this day by day here. The dry season, the dry season, and the more intense rain and flood seasons, they have a huge impact in economic security, huge impact in communities, huge impact in some cities, small communities all around the country. Yeah. For example, this most intense dry season, you have current caused the rivers dry up in the Amazon basin. I'm sure the audience here have seen in the international media the image of the dry beds of the river. Yeah, in different rivers, the Amazon, you see this image. But what this means? This is a tragedy. This is a tragedy in the region where rivers are the roads, when the rivers move the peoples and the goods and the assistance, which the source was the sustainability, the way to go to work, the way to go to school, the way to go to the hospitals is the rivers. The rivers are the roads, are the connections, yeah, here. And if you don't have the rivers, the medicines can arrive, the patients can be moved, and usually people die without appropriate medical attentions. Yeah, and one thing I think it's good to remember: in part of the Amazon basin, you don't have roads, and you never will be, because the geographical characteristics of the region. Yeah, and these isolate communities in the Amazon, some villages or some small and medium cities with more than 100,000. Inhabitants, like the Fang, the middle Solomon's River, yeah, they are in the precarious conditions now. The essential things, the fuels to generate electricity, the foods, the medicines can't come back. That's even the capital of the state of Amazon, 2 million people, Manaus with 2 million people inhabitants. Some of the companies declared now holidays. Yeah, because the inputs for the industry don't arrive, because the dry season get out of the navigability of the Black River in front of the city. And the air transportation isn't really alternative because it's very expensive in Brazil. Due this immensity of the regime, we're talking about flights that could take some hours. For example, 3 hours Manaus from Nerunepé in the basin of Juruá, 2 hours Manaus from São Gabriel da Cachoeira in the Black River basin. There's a cities with some land strips, but there are the small communities you don't reach in airplanes, you just reach in helicopters, because that is more expensive. Yeah, usually the armed force provide air support, send food transport capabilities to try and mitigate, yeah, the bottleneck generated by the isolation, but caused by this dry season. Yeah, and why the armed force normally? Because they have equipment. They have more equipment. They have more than other agencies. Yeah. Well, the other kind of example that we could say about how the climate change impacts the Brazil, the whole country, is about the floods and the big rains. Yeah. Well, when we have this kind of disaster, usually in the southwest of Brazil, people lost lives and usually lost the goods and how to say this? I think this is a kind of disaster that affect everyone. And what happened? Usually, the institutional, the firefighters, so the civil defense, the guys that need help.
Tassio, you're muted. Tassio, you're muted. I don't know if you can hear us. You're on mute. There you go.
Now?
Yeah, we can hear you now. Thanks.
Okay. Well, the climate change impacts in the agriculture sector in the southwest or in Amazon affect whole economy. Yeah, the agriculture sector is 20% of the whole GDP of the country. When you generate this kind of impact, usually you have unemployment and you have human insecurity for some people in the base of the pyramid. Yeah, this makes it possible to amortize losses in one region. Sometimes because the huge country, you have dry season in one side, you have the floods in another. You can balance this. But however, it's more extreme climate change scenarios coming. These specifics show us the risk need to be take it and think in integrate way to solve this. Yeah, because the climate change don't respect, as you say here, the political boundaries.
Excellent. Thanks a lot, Tassio, for I think kicking off this part of the discussion with such a clear illustration of, again, the way not just physical security is impacted, but also other forms of security as well. So with that, Rafael, I'd like to turn to you and look at this more from the perspective of communities and specifically migrants and refugees, and ask if you could talk a little bit about the key challenges that are faced by refugees and migrants who have been displaced by climate change and how these challenges impact security. So over to you, Rafael.
Hello, good afternoon. Thank you for the invitation. It is a pleasure to be here. As said before, I am a member of the Jesuit Refugee Service in Brazil. And to answer this important and defining question, of course, I'll focus on the situation of refugees in Brazil and the experience we have dealing with these people and offering services that I will later detail. But I'm sure that this applies to many other regions around the globe. So first, it's important to understand that we are talking about people who are forced to flee their homeland and usually separated from their family and friends, and they must start a new life in a completely new environment. This, of course, generates extremely serious psychological trauma that must be dealt with a matter of priority by the institutions who are responsible. They also have urgent needs related to housing and alimentation, because usually they come with no money and no place to stay. So we have to deal with this as soon as they arrive. It's no coincidence that as soon as they cross the border. We have many shelters in Brazil. Another priority is teaching the local language. Without the ability to communicate with the local population, the whole integration process is compromised. Venezuela and Brazil share, they speak Spanish, we speak Portuguese, it's similar, so it's easier. But now we have here many Afghans, they don't speak a single word, so it's much more complicated. So teach the local language. The fourth, of course, is that people must be regularized in the new country. When a particular nation voluntarily chooses not to offer refugee status to a refugee or any formal documentation, it is saying that that individual is prohibited from accessing the most basic rights of that society. And the fifth I must highlight is financial autonomy. It is essential that the conditions are created for refugees who arrive in the country to be able to access the labor market. Having an income capable of, at the very least, guaranteeing food, housing, health, is crucial for these people to be able to get on with their lives. They want to work and they have admirable willpower. And the last need I would like to highlight is something very unique from this situation between Venezuela and Brazil and other Latin America countries, which is the migration of indigenous people. We are seeing high numbers of indigenous people coming to Brazil from Venezuela, and they have different needs, not only these ones that I just mentioned, but other kind of needs as well. And Brazil is trying to understand how we can give a response specifically to this group, but until now we didn't have the success we need. And to understand the impacts of these needs on public security is relatively simple. If we put the pieces together and imagine a person with these 5 urgent and latent needs: psychological trauma, no shelter or food, inability to relate in a new country due to language difficulties, impossibility to access public service due to lack of documentation, and being cut off from the job market and any source of income. If we treat this person with violence, these needs won't go away. They will remain there and new ones will appear. So for me, a nation that understands and treats these people who arrives as an integration project, which aims to meet the needs I have listed, will see a positive impact on public safety. Don't fool yourselves. The refugees want to survive first and foremost and build a new life, but they don't want to do it by illegal means. Respect them and give them the necessary conditions, and you'll find and you see their great potential. On the other hand, a nation that doesn't understand this reality and treats the situation only as a matter of national security, as a case of police, we'll find that the impact will be precisely the opposite of what it seeks, the worsening of public security.
Thanks, Rafael. Those are really valuable perspectives, I think, especially in an era in which we are often falling prey to the tendency to securitize migration. So thanks for framing it also in terms of, an integration project and thinking in terms of potential at a time when human beings are on the move on an unprecedented scale, and not just in your region. So thanks a lot. Tassio, I want to turn back to you now. You very nicely and clearly illustrated some of the security impacts of climate change across the vast country of Brazil. And I'd like to ask if you could now dive a little bit deeper into how the Brazilian security sector is actually responding to climate-related security challenges, and ideally also what challenges security institutions themselves face in this space.
Okay, well, think about the security sector. Think about the Brazilian security sector, the armed force and the different police force that the country has. Federal policies, state policies, and each of the institutions have this own. They are designed their own guidelines, their own policies, programs, and actions to respond the challenge of the climate change. Like the Defense Ministry, they have the Defense Green Book published in 2017, for an example to how to the Army, the Navy, and the Armed Force and the Air Force. Will do with this, but it's impossible to talk about all of these documents, all of the regulations that each agency Great, yeah. Well, so I will only focus to involve the security and defense sector that are carried out jointly in cooperation, what they do together, yeah, now in Brazil. Well, as you know, Brazil is signatory of a series of agreements, of international agreements, focused on the mitigation of climate change. One of the key elements of these achievements, some of the goals assumed by the country, is the reduction of the deforestation, especially in Amazon. Let's take a step back and talk about what we know the environmental degradation in Amazon. How Brazil knows this happened? Yeah, how the country, not just in pictures, you know, like in the 17s or in 16s. Yeah, the initiative to monitor environmental degradation in Amazon sits back to the 90s. Yeah, with the creation of CIVAM-CIPAM. It's the Amazon surveillance system and the Amazon protection system. One focuses on monitoring the aerial threats, yeah, like the drug traffic plannings, and the other is monitoring the deforestation. The systems became fully operational around 2002, 20 years ago. Because this and the other initiatives, Brazil today has excellent monitoring capacity to environmental crimes and data is accessible. Yeah, if you go anywhere, you can go to INPE, it's National Space Research. They have one portal called PD Queimadas, or to go to the CIVAM, you call it the panel of fire. Yeah, you can access, anyone can access this kind of data. CIVAM use the satellite data, radar, and optical image to support an artificial intelligence. Now you can find the classification of the algorithm using the AI and use the algorithms to identify the hotspots of illegal mining sites, to try and understand what's if the fires, yeah, it's a natural fire, or it's a proposital fire, or it's a false heat source generated by like a zinc roof, a metal roof, for example, or you can look for a satellite image the turbidity of the water and identify the illegal mining on the rivers. Yeah, well, you have a lot of the crimes happen. The big problem is how operate together to stop this kind of crime. Yeah, and because the Amazon is so huge, the cost of each operation it's enormous. Yeah, and usually any agents alone can't hold this. Yeah, some emblematic actions in recent years to respond of these environmental crimes and deforestation, including against the indigenous people, like in Yanomami Reserve. One of the most emblematic actions, we call it Brazilian Amazon. In Brazilian Amazon is Operation Verde Brasil 1 and 2, and have others, Operation Sumauma, Operation Ileia, but these two start in September of 2009 until April 2001. These two operations put together the Ministry of Environmental and Climate Change, the Ministry of Justice, the Ministry of Defense, and other ministries, Armed Force, policies, Brazilian Institute of Environmental and Renewable Natural Resource, and CIVAM, fire departments, public ministry, everyone, put all together. Well, time to time it's occur, yeah? But usually this cooperation was sporadically, just during the operation. Now they build something different in the last year, yeah? They built one thing called Integrated Group of Protection of the Amazon, GPAM. They have people of each one of these agents, and during the combat, the last years of combat of deforestation and burnings in Amazon, this group aims to make more rational use of various human and material resources available to each institution to defend the security sector. When they are in the joint operation, they get the data and show how you can use, where you can operate. Yeah, and one thing, usually, as I say, it's sporadic. Now it's a permanent structure in Brazil. That's different. That's integration. And that's because that you already saw some the deforestation it's a little bit lower than the last years. They start getting results of this. Yeah. Well, but they have another another problem that I said, and we already you see here, connected to environmental crimes. Yeah. Because it's the last decade in Amazon, not just in Brazil. The presence of criminal organizations involved in environmental crime was intensified. For example, the gold extracting and illegal minings in Amazon region used to launder a drug trafficking money. It's the gold it's the gold is the new cocaine in the last 10 years. Yeah, the Amazon crown produce alone 10% of the global demand of the metal. The demand of the gold, legal or illegal, causes the illegal mining to explode in indigenous lands, in conservation areas, and in other locations. Thus, the preservation of the Amazon is one of the essential elements of the mitigation of combat climate change. Combating the organized crime is one of the current challenges facing the security and defense sector in the region, not just in Brazil. Because as you say, these criminal organizations, they don't have boundaries. They operate international companies. Yeah. And as you say, privilege, the climate change, but I don't want to leave this, I will finish. I don't want to leave you with the impression the problem of environmental degradation in Amazon is just a police case. Yeah? The human security is much more complex than this. As you said in the previous question, climate change was generate different degrees of human insecurity. Whatever due to the isolation, the lack of access of essential service, the Brazilian Amazon has a sad background linked to the corruption, linked to inequality, to poverty, the lack of alternatives for this population, and other things. The weakness and worseness the climate change. It's generated a bad circle, this bad circle that feedbacks the workforce due to the environmental degradation. Well, it's
Thanks, Tassio.
part of the
I'm gonna ask you if you can just, I'm going to ask if you can wrap up now, because I want to make sure we have just one more question for Rafael as well. Then I want to make sure our audience members have a chance to engage with you as well, because I'm certain there are going to be questions. But thank you. I think the Brazilian government has such a fascinating history of bringing different instruments, bringing different sectors together to address the problem of deforestation and environmental crime more broadly. And I think there's a lot we can learn from that. So thank you. Rafael, I want to turn to you and ask if you could just briefly maybe share your thoughts one more time with us. And this time I'd like to ask, seen from the perspective of civil society and NGOs, how do you think civil society organizations can better collaborate with the security sector to ensure the safety and well-being of climate displaced populations?
All right. So considering a continuation of the first question I answered, I believe the main role of NGOs and civil society organizations is to act in a way that seeks to meet the needs of the public they serve, in which I previously mentioned 5. To better illustrate this, I'll mention how the work we do in Brazil works in practice, where civil society organizations work in strong coordination with various other types of organizations, including security-related institutions. But to help you understand, I have to go back a few years, around 2015 and 16, when Brazil saw a huge number of Venezuelan people arriving in the north border of the country in a small town called Pacaraima in the state of Roraima, which is in the north region, a region that is not very well economically developed. Right from the start, it was clear that if no intersectorial or multi-level and nationally coordinated response was made, the state of Roraima would collapse, both in terms of public services and security. Therefore, Operation Acolhida was structured. Acolhida, it could be translated as Operation Welcome, a formidable initiative that Brazil has put together. This operation is made up of more than 100 organizations where civil society institutions are strongly related to security institutions, for example, UN system, international institutions, federal government, regional governments, and many others. The key word of this major operation is internalization, where the aim is to internalize those who enter through the country's northern border to other regions with greater capacity to receive them and with greater work capacity to absorb them. Internalization can occur on one of the three following reasons, when one of the three following reasons is met. For a job vacancy, which occurs when the refugee is hired by a company in another region of the country, so we send them to this another region. Family reunion, which occurs when the refugee has a family member or friend already established in another region of the country. Or when we say institutional, which occurs when a shelter vacancy opens up in another region of the country. This is just the vertebral structure I just told you. But in this large operation, as I told you, we have a deep connection with security institutions, and I give you three direct examples of how we relate. In the shelters, day-to-day coordination. In the shelters, I mean the ones that you see in the movies sometimes. The coordination, the day-to-day coordination is done in partnership between the army and the civil society. So the army has some specific tasks. For example, they are responsible for the security, they are responsible for the maintenance, they are responsible for the food distribution and some other tasks, while civil society does, for example, the case management, the occupation management, among others. And there is always a leadership of the army and a leadership of the civil society who are always talking to each other. A second example is between the civil society and the army in this operation is precisely the transportation necessary for interiorization, where for a long time the transportation of people to these other regions of Brazil were made by the army in their buses or in the airplanes. But the ones who selected the people and understand who would be put in this process were the civil society organizations, who makes this case management. A third example is something that my organization, for example, has in partnership with the federal police. We prepare a pre-documentation, which is a refugee comes to our office, they need some documents to be legal in Brazil. We prepare this pre-documentation. This person takes these pre-documents to the federal police, who recognize these pre-documents, and in 1 or 2 weeks, they are already legal in Brazil. They can stay, they have a work permit. So in 2 weeks, usually they are very well established here in the point of documentation. And a fourth one I would like to share with you. It's something that we call it here Petrigi, which is, I can tell, is something like a huge office where each of these institutions has a room, for example. So the army, the federal police, the UN system agencies, the civil society organizations, and each one has its own role there. And everybody communicates in a daily basis. Everybody communicates in a weekly basis. They report to each other. They have a good relation. So they have meetings, regular meetings. And of course, this communication is extremely important. So these are some examples of direct coordination between public security and civil society. But I would like to reiterate that for me, the best way for civil society to cooperate positively with public security in the case of refugees is to provide the necessary support for these people. For example, we at the Jesuit Migrant Refugee Service, we offer psychological care, pre-documentation services, legal orientation, Portuguese courses, school enrollment for children, civil preparation, partnerships with companies so they can hire these people. We train the leaders of the refugees to carry out political advocacy, among many other kind of activities. And I believe that this is the best way we can cooperate.
Thanks, Rafael. That's really, I think, really helpful, very clear and concrete. And we also often think about, kind of the immediate response of the security sector to natural disasters, for example, or, tackling environmental crime. I think when we consider, I think Cindy's remarks earlier about leveraging the capacity of the security sector in a different way, we don't always think about these kinds of really interesting examples of how civil society and the security sector can work together in service of and support of refugees and migrants. So thanks for that. We are getting very close to the end of our time. I want to see if there's maybe 1 or 2 questions, and I would ask, if so, if we could be very brief with those, because I know the organizer is going to be quite strict with us in wrapping up so we can move back into plenary shortly. So thank you first very much, Tassio and Rafael, for your excellent interventions. Very much appreciated. And are there any questions in the room or online that we could briefly pose? None immediately in the room. Yeah,
But
Cindy,
I'll
please.
defer to, I'll let others if no one else has a question.
Or anyone online. Yeah, why don't you go ahead, Diego?
Yes, this is a question that is for Tassio. If Tassio, if you could give some examples of successful cross-border cooperation with neighboring countries to counter environmental crime.
And again, we've got about 5 minutes, maybe a little bit less left. So I would ask just to be really, really brief in your response, please. Thanks. Go ahead, Tassio.
Okay, yeah, let's go. You have some examples, like your collaboration with French Guiana in activities against illegal mining. Yeah. The Brazilian Army, Brazilian Federal Police together, the National Park Service for French Guiana. The illegal miners, when they just flew for the other side of the border, they wait 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and they come back. Yeah, and because that when you work in both sides, it's be better. Some example of this you can find in Colombia with the Brazilian Army and Colombian Army, and in Bolivia you have something. I think in Bolivia and with Paraguay, you have something better. You have an agreement, better these countries, that one policy, if in the middle of the operation, the guys just flow, they can't go inside the other country and arrest the guy and come back. Yeah, this is a few examples. Another example is when you build some, like in the south, you have an integrated room to try everyone talk together 1 time in a week, 1 time a month, for example. But we need do more. We really need do more.
Thanks a lot, Tassio. Very much appreciated. I think with that, we are going to wrap up because I see that the rest of our breakout groups are ending. So I want to say a big thank you again to Tassio and Rafael for their excellent interventions, for everything you've shared. I hope you will stick around with us for the wrap up of the plenary so we can bring some of these thoughts together from the Colombia and Brazil portions of this discussion. Thank you to Diego and Maria as well, and to Peter for your thoughts. And I think we are going to wrap up now, and we will see you all in plenary in just a couple of minutes. So many thanks to our audience as well, and we'll see you back here in just a minute. Thank you.
Great.
Oh, okay, it's not over yet. Hold on. There's like 5 more minutes worth of stuff. I'm just trying to convince our other breakout groups.
We were the late ones last time, so we wanted to.
Yeah, exactly. The folks, they had a really small group next door, but they had 1,000 questions. And so they're just on their Okay, so I'm hopeful that the folks online can hear. We're almost there. I know it's actually it's a really long period of time for those of you who have been online. It's a long period of time for those of you who have been in the room. But I actually just have, I think we often attend conversations and events that are really rich, and then we sort of walk away and it doesn't actually get sort of fed into anything that we do. So I just wanted to spend a couple minutes actually asking you to just do a quick reflection. And so this is for both the folks online and in the room. If you can get out a piece of paper and a pen or a phone or a computer, I'm gonna ask you to write something down, and you can choose your method of how you wanna write it down. But again, just a piece of paper and a pen or a phone or a computer, and I'll wait. And I'm looking and I'll see you if you don't. So I'd just like you to write down, what is one thing I've learned today? And what is one question I still have? What is one thing I've learned today? What is one thing I've learned today, and what is one question that I still have? And to clarify, you're writing the answers to the questions, not the questions themselves.
You can if you want.
It's true. It is a choose your own adventure. What is one thing I've learned, and what is one question I still have? And if you're an overachiever and you've already finished those two, the final question is, will I, it's a yes or no question, will I act on any of this information within the next month? You're gonna ask somebody the question that you have, the thing that you learned. Will I act on any of this information in the next month? And then as a follow-up, how? If you said yes. Will I act on this information in the next month? And if yes, how? How will you act on it? Anybody need more time? Okay. Now I just invite you to, for a small group, find somebody you don't know and just take 2 minutes and share what you wrote down. Again, try to find somebody in the room that you don't know and take 2 minutes to share what you've written down. Now, for the folks online, I understand that's quite difficult. We can't open 45 breakout rooms. We could, but it would probably be logistically challenging. So I just would invite you to post it in the chat. Just post, you can post your answer to any of the questions that we've asked, and just post that in the chat. And I'll call out a couple of responses if you'd like. So again, find somebody you don't know and just share for a couple minutes. Yeah. everybody. Can I just call you out of conversation back?
I really believe
It's always kind of like pulling
leaders,
teeth.
village, regional, national level.
You moved, you can go back to this. Okay. I'm curious, does anybody want to share what they're gonna, their action item? Anybody want to share what, well, first of all, will you act on the information you've learned? Are there any yeses in the audience? Okay, there are at least 3 yeses, 4 or 5. Okay, great. Does anybody want to share how they think they might act on this information?
I'm ignorant. I will read more. I have so many questions. That's my action point, to know more.
Yeah, so I guess the question, what questions do I still have? The better question is, what questions don't I have?
Yes, I think opening the today's event has opened my horizon a little bit. So I would like to understand, how does this connect to my current knowledge, and where does this lead us in terms of the new knowledge we can create?
Sure.
Yeah, well, actually, building on that, it's also like sharing the knowledge that one has, I think is very important, and strong action plan. One of the things that I want to do, for example, is inquire. I work as an interpreter, freelance for some organizations that do some work related to this, and you know, I thought, okay, maybe this would be a good time to start inquiring with the people that hire me and asking them further on these points, and especially being lucky enough to be part of this talk, you know, to relate these points together as to what's the effort, because we were sharing in our little group here, it's also about bringing different communities together at the local level, regional level, national level, and even organizations worldwide. It's something very important, because that is how change is achieved. We can start, we can talk about it for a long time, but it's when we bring ourselves together that, okay, action can be taken.
It's about sort of understanding, what is my positionality? What's available to me now? What's available to me today? Not me becoming a new person with a different amount of power in a different part of the system, but where I am now, what's possible. That's a really nice reflection. I want to just thank everybody for being here. I know that we started with a bigger group than we ended up with, and that's absolutely fine. You are the mighty ones who have made it through, and to those of you online. So just thank you for being here. I really want to thank Tatiana for all of your work to make all of the hybridity happen, and I really think an enormous amount of work has gone into this, and we just really appreciate it, because it's that connectivity that's actually allowed us to ground these conversations in lived experience, which doesn't happen a lot in Geneva. So it's an incredible amount of labor, but it's brought an incredible amount of value to these conversations. Also to Zoe and Kim is out there. Zoe, I think I saw over there. They were the tech hosts who also made these breakout rooms possible. So I really also, let's see, I have a long list of the partner organizations behind this. I don't know, I didn't say this at the beginning. The Geneva Peace Building Platform, TrustWorks Global, the European Institute of Peace, International Trade Center, Principle for Peace Foundation, DCAF Geneva Center for Security Sector Governance, Adelphi, Groupe Sécurité Climatique Haïti, Ministère de l'Environnement d'Haïti, UN Development Program, and UN Environment Program. All of those organizations collaborated to make that happen, and I really appreciate all of the work that went into this. I hope that you have some interesting action items that you're taking home, that you've had enriching conversations. Our interpreters online, especially, thank you so much for your work. And most importantly, all of you, thanks for coming with open ears, open minds, and a sense of curiosity. I'm looking forward to hearing maybe where some of those action items take you, and maybe we'll have another action library again in the future. Thank you. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.